Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Laura Curtin. I'm the VP of Sales and Strategy here at ATR International. We are a woman-owned, diversity-certified recruiting firm, and we're headquartered up in Silicon Valley. Joining me is ATR's Angelique Alvarez, who's the head of supplier diversity and inclusion. And we have Patrick Barnsley, account executive. And our honored guest today, Jim Hogan, who's inclusion champion with his large tech company in Silicon Valley. So thank you for joining us, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
We are grateful to have you here. So let's jump right in. Would you tell us a bit about your career path, which led you to your role advocating for those with autism?
Absolutely. I mean, my world in corporate America has not been easy. So my journey has been one of discovery and not always very nice. So I was relentlessly bullied, and just trying to be a voice for the voiceless, because many people are getting bullied that just spend so much time trying to get into the workplace. So as an autistic individual, and I'm just a little bit older now, and I've been this is my 38th year of working. So I'm pretty much now to the point where I've become an activist for anti-bullying. And what got me off the couch was my most recent role. When I told my mom about it, and I said, I've got this amazing job offer, and I hadn't seen her in a really long time because of COVID. And I was supposed to go fly out there and see her on that Saturday. I talked to her video conference and just over a FaceTime, and I told her I accepted the job, and she was so happy because the company is somebody that is really great at disability rights and everything else, and she was just so happy. And I was supposed to see her 4 days later, but she died 3 days later.
Oh.
And she told my sisters, he's going to be okay. And here's an 88-year-old woman who worried about me every day of her life since I came into her life, and was always concerned because, bullying in corporate America it's not just some kind of funny punchline. This is like a mental health crisis. And when I've been in a situation where I was actually hospitalized for hostile workplace, I had a complete psychotic break. And, I go through these heinous things that you wouldn't wish upon anybody. And my mom was always so concerned. And every time I had to talk to her and tell her, it's like, she could just hear it in my voice that something was going on. And so now for the first time in my career, I have found my place, and I'm now starting to give back. And what really drove me to activism was the weekend that my mom passed away, was the same weekend that George Floyd was murdered. And when he was calling out for his mother, while I was grieving for my mother, and I just realized, like, somebody's got to stand up for people, and I'm just not going to allow this bullying to happen. So when I start my new job, I'm going to rise up. I'm going to become a global leader. I'm going to bring the disability community and the autistic community, together. Start putting some organization around it, and go from that important step from being an advocate to actually activism, which is a big difference.
It's really such an honor to be on this with you, Jim. I'm so grateful that you made time to educate us and educate others. Our podcast here at ATR is something that we've been ramping up with professionals with different backgrounds. And that's what it's about, is really bringing different backgrounds and the importance that everyone brings to every company, across the world. So thank you. I'd like to really dive in when it comes to diversity and really how important equity is in the workplace, and what your thoughts are around autism being included with D&I initiatives.
Right. And it's and I tell people this all the time, and it takes me a couple of attempts, but usually for us, autistic career is something that needs to be shepherded, and it's not about, when I say shepherded, I mean, when somebody enters the organization who's autistic, they require the proper mentoring and the proper community and a sense of belonging that you have to have, to make sure that they've got people that understand them and that they can be sounded off on. So it's much less important about the hiring process as it is to have that entire inclusion plan and, that graduation of inclusion, as I call it, belonging. inclusion is when you basically say, hey, Johnny, you could be part of our organization. We're going to invite you to meetings, and if you have a good idea, maybe we'll let you share from time to time. But that sense of belonging, that community feeling where I really belong here, and this is something that I feel like not only is my voice something that they allow me to say something, but my voice is actually being heard and people are actually responding to me. And this comes from actually looking at what neurodiversity actually is. And when we talk about diversity, everybody knows that if you look at an auditorium full of people that's inclusive of the entire world, let's just say I have this gigantic auditorium and I put everybody in it, and I'm looking out, and what I'm going to see are physical distinctions which separate people. I'm going to see different hair color, different ear shape, different eye shape, and there's all of those things, and all of the things that I didn't mention are what make up diversity as a whole inclusive thing. Now that what we don't see is how somebody's brain works, how somebody interprets the world, and that is called neurodiversity. And that neurodiversity, just like diversity is inclusive of the entire world population. Now, I was born with a genetic distinction. I was born autistic, and that genetic distinction makes me neurodistinct. It doesn't make me a less than or more than or any different than. What it makes me is distinct in the way that I interpret the world. And the way that I interpret the world, just like the way you interpret the world, are both beautiful. And so it's about understanding what that is. So when we can start to bring people in and say, I'm going to bring in and start a neurodiversity hiring program. It's like, well, you already have a neurodiversity hiring program, because if you're hiring everybody, then you're basically already neurodiverse. So, but it's understanding the differences in the process that need to take place when you have neurodistinctions start presenting. And that's when we start to modify the way that unconscious bias works in the interview process, because there are a bunch of societal norms that have existed for decades. And whoever invented those societal norms, I guarantee you they're not autistic. And so things like lack of affect or facial expressions. It's like when I take a selfie with my wife and I'm not smiling and I post it. Somebody's like, why are you so unhappy? Are you okay? Are you guys, everything all right? It's like, I am happy. I'm just because I may not have the external capability of having the proper affect at that moment doesn't mean that I'm not happy in my marriage. So just as a comedy version of what I'm talking about. But when people are going through an interview, they may be viewed as somebody who's dishonest because they're not looking someone in the eye. They may want to fidget or tap their fingers or play with a pen or tap their leg, and all of these things that are physical manifestations of the neurodistinction. Especially if somebody's autistic, there's a huge barrage and blizzard going on in our brain, and sometimes we have physical manifestations of that, such as tapping or what we call stimming. And so what we did is we retrained everybody that was hiring, and we said, we want you to remove these unconscious bias. We don't want any comments on how somebody is acting as from a physical manifestation of like if you ask them a question, they start tapping. We don't want any notes about that. We don't want to discuss eye contact or voice and timbre or smiling or not smiling and all those things that are if you think about excluding somebody for that. And that's why I always say that the interview processes don't need to be more inclusive. They need to be less exclusive. And those are two distinctly different things. Exclusion is when I'm unconsciously going to say, Laura, you're not going to get this job because you didn't look me in the eye in the interview and you're dishonest. And I have this unconscious bias. And because that's what I was taught through societal norms. So it's about taking those societal norms and smashing crap out of them and making sure that everybody understands that the world is a beautiful place filled with all kinds of people with all kinds of different ways they perceive information and the way their brains work. And, once you cut through all the crap and bring people in, you realize that the talent is right there under your nose the whole time. So
I think that's excellent, advice, especially with us being a recruiting firm and placing individuals and working with different hiring managers and different companies. It's so important for these, for our own internal practices, as well as for the corporation level, to really consider those things when interviewing individuals.
Yeah, Jim, that sounds really great. As we spoke before, I grew up having to be my brother's advocate through scouting, through school, as he was working on getting jobs. So what commitment should companies be doing for employees with autism, and how important is it to bring awareness and unconscious biases for interviewing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very important because people are letting candidates slip through the cracks because they're not addressing everybody, and the way that people perceive the world differently means that somebody may not be the perfect resume, or they might not have the perfect exact background, but it's about taking that extra time to understand their story, and not use the normal, what I always call the exclusion criterion, that people just are fast to exclude. You get a stack of resumes in, you've got 150 resumes, you're going to quickly go through there and pull out the top 6, and everybody else is going to get thrown away. So it's looking for those differences, and that's when we talk about having a career program where we're going to bring people in who are neurodistinct. We're going to look for the folks through different job fairs and different things, and we're going to create a funnel that's going to bring people in. However, they're still going to hit the same systems, and unless we actually eliminate that unconscious bias, and sometimes it's not unconscious bias, sometimes it's like the font size is wrong on a resume and I hate this and I'm just going to throw it away. I'm going to spend 6 seconds looking at a resume. I'm not going to understand somebody's story. And it's about giving care and feeding to the funnel when you're bringing folks in. And as I work as a mentor to individuals that are part of these programs, they'll say like, well, the recruiter didn't get back to me, which is a big no-no, because if you're dealing with an autistic individual, they're most likely going to be perceiving any type of silence or anything as a huge hurtful thing, because they've been when you're creating a funnel, you're now promising somebody that I'm going to give you the care and feeding that you need to get you a job, and when you don't give them the care and feeding they need to get a job, it's much worse situation. And you also have to realize that you're dealing with somebody who is and I always explain it this way. It's like, I'm a big guy. When you meet me, it's like physical prowess, there's not a problem. Somebody tries to mug us while we're on the street together, I'm going to take care of that situation because I'm a big guy, tough. Everybody can see that right away. But I have a fragility in my mind, and I've gone through things that have made my mind, more fragile than a typical 54-year-old man. So sometimes things, the way they're perceived, you're actually creating like a mental health crisis, with folks if you're not really delivering on the promise that you're doing. So, and a little bit of a roundabout way to answer the question, but I mean, it's like when folks go out to target a particular group of anybody and say, I'm going to hire, let's say I'm going to say hire more autistic individuals, then you have to make sure you understand the psychology around that and provide the care and feeding that population is going to need when they bring in, especially if you're creating a separate funnel for that. So
that's great. So I wanted to touch base. You wanted to talk about the difference between saying individual with autism versus autistic individual. What's the significance of that? How does that help with perception?
Well, the difference is that when somebody is born this way, and if you're part of any type of genetic distinction, we don't really describe that we're now with something. Like, I didn't go to the jungle and catch autism like malaria. So, it really is part of my genetic makeup. And so by saying something like with, that means that it's something that I'm actually carrying on that's additional to my own identity. So there's many individuals who will say, that they were born with autism. Some people will say they were born autistic. That's a personal preference thing. But I noticed that most of the folks that are really advocates and activists in this, they want to make sure that this thing that distinguishes that it's like saying that somebody was born with, I was born with gay, or I was born with female, or something like that. Like, it's not a with situation. It's just it's a way somebody identifies. And so I say that I'm an autistic individual. I was born this way. I'm part of a normal makeup of the genetic pool. I'm part of the human race. Race is a word I hate, but that's just the way language is these days. So, but we don't really use with, because that's something that it says that we've kind of picked it up or caught it along the way somehow. So, and that's just the big difference.
Wow. This is so helpful, even for us doing a lot of recruiting, interviewing, working with diverse folks. I think this is really helpful, even for folks in our industry to use, and even HR, talent acquisition teams to really take heed to that. So thank you for clarifying. So you mentioned you're part of the Disability Alliance. Can you tell us about that? And please share with others some groups that are a great resource.
Yeah, so Disability Alliance is what my company has for the it's called an employee resource group, and we have employee resource groups for a lot of communities, and what it is for like-minded people to come together, but it's also for allies of that particular community to come together. So for instance, when we have the Pride, it's the same thing as the Disability Alliance Enterprise Resource or Employee Resource Group, but it is something that you can now become an ally of that group, even if you don't identify as what that group makeup is about. So, and under the Disability Alliance, we have groups for people that are ADHD. We have, groups for mobility, for deafness, for blindness, and then we've got big overarching groups that governs and provides things, like talking about accessibility, and planning different things to make sure that our voices are always heard. And the big thing about employee resource groups is that we use the mantra "nothing about us without us." If I'm sitting in a meeting and somebody comes to me and says, "Jim, I'm going to start a autism hiring program, and I met with a bunch of non-autistic people, and here's what we came up with," and I'm immediately going to say, nothing about us without us. We don't allow people to talk about, the makeup of what's going to impact our group, without being involved. And that's what we always talk about. The difference between that and allyship is that allyship is very important. Like, I have to actually curate external belief. I have to get non-autistic individuals to tell my story, because as my wife, one of the most brilliant humans I know, says, a bunch of people whispering is much better than one person screaming. And so I'm in the whisper mode right now, and I try to get as many people around the globe to whisper my story, to get me to talk on their all hands calls, to let me tell their story. If somebody asks me to do a podcast, I'm going to do that, because it's these type of things that are going to educate people. Education is something that's going to foster many people to jump into allyship, and they're going to ask me those questions. And and it's like somebody is caring for an autistic individual that they love, and they want to, sometimes they want to ask my advice about something, and then when I bring them into the fold, I ask them if they would like to talk on a meeting sometime, and then we have them, rolling around spreading our word with the PowerPoint presentations and things like that. So those are all key aspects of allyship, and what the employee resource groups do is allow people to kind of subscribe to that and come in and help out. So, and I am active in many of those groups around that I don't necessarily have I don't necessarily impacted by whatever they're representing, but I am allies for many of those groups.
So inspiring. I just want to say, I know, I can't just speak for myself, but I'm sure I could speak for all of us that, we at ATR, we're your allies. It's been such an honor to meet you, to hear your story. I know this only kind of showcases a snippet of your story. We had a lengthy conversation a few weeks back, but it really did shape me. And I did think that it's changed me for the future, for the better. You don't know what you don't know till you know it. And so I'm really excited for all that I can do. I'd love to see who else we can touch, sharing this video, this podcast, who else we can reach to join us and join you. I love, I'm excited to see all the things that you have ahead. I know that there's so much going for you in your future that you've already done. I'm really sorry that you had to go through some of the things that you have. I'm really happy that your mom got to see this journey ahead of you with your career path, and that you're not even done. You're not even done doing all that you're doing and you're going to do. But tell us a little bit about, I know you mentioned that you're going to be, having your own podcast and a book that you're authoring. We'd love to share that information so that others can follow and purchase.
Well, the name of my book is called My Time on Your Planet. It's intergalactic anthropologist view of Earthlings, if written from perspective of somebody who's researching. It comes from that feeling of that we feel like we're from another planet sometimes when you're on Earth, and how things are happening, how people are reacting to different things, and so I talk about love and grief, and tell some very personal stories about my life and lives that have impacted me. And then the reason why I mentioned it in the same vein is that the podcast is going to cover these topics. Our podcast is called Longing for Belonging, and it's going to cover that elusive sense of belonging and how do you achieve that in multiple things. And we're going to talk about family. We're going to talk about polarization. We're going to talk about not just disabilities and autistic subjects. We're going to talk about belonging as we've got all kinds of interesting subjects we're going to talk about, politics and all of the zany things that happen with polarization and religion and all kinds of things. So anything that somebody can belong to, we're going to cover that on the podcast. And that rains on the draws from the themes of my book, and so we're going to kind of do a dual launch of the podcast and then the book after that. So my partner in that is going to be co-author, and I have another psychologist co-author. It basically takes the approach of me describing a situation, and then I have two psychologist ladies dulge it out and explain what the hell it is I'm talking about. So anyway, it's very entertaining so far. So
I can't wait.
Yeah. Jim, I thought it was very inspiring listening to you today. You're such an incredible individual, sincerely, what you're doing. I think what I really learned, a takeaway too, is the whispering is true. I think if people share a loud story, it might not be heard as much, or a few people, but I think the whispering really is an important thing. And I think people are starting to do that. And it's just even neat the way that you and I got to know each other was through, you were posting, it was on LinkedIn, and you were really proud of your company, how diverse they are and championing. And I commented on your post, and then we got connected. So I think people little by little are whispering your story around the world. So keep going, keep being a champion, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. And I know my people will know that I do work for Google, because you're going to share it, and everyone will go out and see that I am very active. And the reason is that I have found a sense of belonging that I never had before, and it's hard to describe. And the reason why, I used to be the guy that would fly off the handle, and if something wasn't going my way, I would type the 14-page email to try to explain myself to everybody. And then I realized that after this change, this transformation that happened right before I started Google, because of the life events I went through and the things that impacted me that I didn't really expect to, I've changed. And I think that has been, a very transformational. So it's like, I think that it was kind of just me molding into a somebody that could actually find that. And now that I found what I found at Google, I'm just extremely happy, and I am now a whisperer. So, and hopefully my posts will speak to folks and click that and pound that like button. So
I think that speaks volumes, to any company that's really going to put, a commitment like that in place. I wanted to touch back really quick before we wrap things up. I hope you don't mind. I just know that we talked about ERG groups, we talked about the Disability Alliance, but what are some other organizations that those who may not know where to go, what website to look up, what to join? Could you share a few just off the top of your head that maybe you would like to recommend?
Well, it depends on what you're looking for, but if you're autistic, the best place to go is to either go to the or to just go to the Stanford Neurodiversity Project, register there as a candidate, as a neurodistinct candidate, and they will give you resources to try to help not only get a job at Google. We did announce a program with Stanford, but they also have other folks that are interested, and they do job fairs and do some counseling, and I am working on that in the periphery. So some of the things that I get to say to them will actually translate into your experience through there. And then there's other things like the UC Davis has Mind, MIND, the Mind Institute, excellent autism research, and And then if you look me up on LinkedIn, you'll see all kinds of places that the people that I recommend all the time. So it's an ebb and flow, because sometimes somebody brand new will be coming out, and Dr. Luther Ireland in Australia is amazing, and but it's people are looking for information for children. You can go to like L's for Autism, which is they have the Center of Excellence in Jupiter, Florida there. But there's a lot of great organizations that are out there, and it depends on your particular situation. So.
Thank you. I think it's great to be able to at least share a few. And I can only imagine how many friend requests you're going to get after this. So once they look you up on LinkedIn.
Well, I am an open book on LinkedIn, so just don't ask for money, and my wife will not block you. So.
So funny. Well, thank you.
It was a pleasure meeting you.
Okay, well, thank you all, and
Thank
have
you.
a great rest of your night. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jim. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.